I was first introduced to Vitalik as the founder of Ethereum, and over the course of a few years, I've gotten to know that there is so much more to him. Today we go on a walk to show you those other sides. On our walk, we talk about everything from decentralized finance to Wall Street bets, Dogecoin, China, Revolt of the Public, a whole list of topics. I'm Morgan Beller, and this is my first NFX podcast. We've walked 3 continents together, and I hope to walk many more. You're Russian, you're Canadian, you're currently walking around Singapore, and you work a lot with Americans. And Americans generally seem to think in a fairly American-centric way. But at the same time, the world is becoming more Americanized in some ways. So I'm curious, like both from looking from the inside out and looking from the outside in, what do you observe, if anything, in the American psyche that you don't think Americans realize about themselves?
There's definitely differences between the United States and many other places in the world, though a lot of the time those differences aren't even what Americans themselves think. Just one random example of this, right? This could also just be my Canadian prejudices, but I just remember growing up 10 years ago, my kind of view of the United States is that it's this horrible materialist, capitalist, white supremacist place where people eat burgers and fries all day. I spent some time in America, spent some time in Europe, spent some time in China, spent some time in plenty of other places. And it does actually kind of become more and more clear that, there's a lot of places that are significantly worse than the US on each one of those dimensions. And there's plenty of parts in the world that are more materialistic than the US is. And there's plenty of places that have less of the depth of, we should try to be altruistic and kind of try to benefit humanity and those kinds of things. So you can even see some of these things in the crypto space, right? So one example of this would be just comparing a US-based crypto project to some of the Asian crypto projects, to some of the European crypto projects. The crypto space is this strange mix of a kind of very idealistic, open and decentralized the world stuff to just, hey, let's trade and gamble and make money. And the places that dominate on the trade and gamble and make money axis are not the US. So the concept of just even, things like let's support open source for the sake of open source, just to give one example, that's definitely one of those things where that's stronger in both the US and Europe than a lot of other places. And the reason why I say that kind of cuts across narratives a bit is because the US is, or maybe the US left's story of the US is that the US is very big on selfishness and individualism and not big on kind of caring about other people. But open source software is the exact opposite of selfishness and individualism in so many ways. And in the US and Europe, from my own observation, are probably two of its strongest epicenters. So that's just one example of many interesting things and contradictions.
How do you define religion? Both what is religion and what is the smallest unit that can still be defined as religion?
Religion itself is definitely a kind of bundle of a few things, right? There is a set of beliefs, there's some notion of some kind of mental and spiritual practice, there's some notion of social connection, and these things all kind of get tied together. There's also often some kind of moral code that gets attached, whether that moral code is kind of personal virtue and how you treat yourself, or interpersonal virtue and how you treat other people. And so there's this kind of big collection of things that are kind of tied together and influence each other. And we're definitely, I think, starting to kind of enter a world where those things start kind of coming apart, and you start have kind of some of those pieces appearing without other pieces. So even already just the idea that there kind of is literally a man in the sky who created the world. Was it 6,024 years ago? I can't remember. Actually, no, it's 6,025 now. Sorry. I mean, because it is definitely and significantly less popular than it was 100 years ago. But at the same time, the demand for the kind of not literally belief related factors is still quite strong, and it's still there. So you have things like like yoga and meditation, and kind of this attempt to explore all of these kind of Asian Enlightenment concepts. That's a form of spirituality without really having an epistemology attached to it. There's just secular morality. So like a lot of the kind of secular moralisms that we talked about before are like people have made the case, and I'm definitely kind of too far from Christian communities to be able to confirm and deny the case, but people have made the case that those ideas are descendants of kind of moralisms that have been part of Christianity around kind of loving the poor and loving your neighbor and loving your enemy and all of these things for thousands of years. And then as far as just kind of creating communities between people, well, the kind of internet has supercharged that, but also changed the nature of that in a lot of ways, right? Like you have fewer of these kind of some closer connections where you just meet people like once a week or just regularly in person, and then more of these just very loose connections where you just know someone by their username. And I don't know, that kind of connection has like different properties.
So what is replacing for religion for you and your tribe?
I think like a lot of things kind of simultaneously are replacing religion. Some of them kind of more healthy than others. Like there's definitely kind of some of these quote political religions that are starting to come out lately, and there's different names for the various political religions. Like there's civic nationalism, there's wokeism, there's this big long list. Yeah, so there's internet communities. So I'm not going to go into that example, but aside from that example, of which I dare not, there's all sorts of subreddits. There's all sorts of just like various things happening in various dark quarters of the internet. Religion don't satisfy all of the functions of religion. They do provide some things, but and they do provide kind of some kind of community aspect, though they provide it in a different form. And
do you think subreddits count as religions? Is Wall Street Bets a religion of sorts?
Are you familiar with the book Revolt of the Public by Martin Gurri? It's a book by a former CIA analyst, I believe, and it goes through some of the kind of revolutions in the Middle East that we saw kind of 5 to 15 years ago. Barack Obama, the book was written before Donald Trump, and Donald Trump just like plays into it so perfectly. And it's discusses what is the common theme between all of these events. And the common theme is basically that like the internet and social media are empowering direct decentralized coordination and at just a much more powerful scale than was possible before. And so basically elites that were able to maintain control during previous eras are just having a much harder time of doing that just because of this sudden technological shock. And the people who are not elites that have just various grievances with the things that the elites are doing are basically just using this new platform to revolt. And the way that I'm seeing Wall Street Bets is basically revolt of the public comes to the stock market, right? So if you think about the stock market, one of these big defining events in a lot of these people's lives is the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, right? Where you know, financial institutions, governments, and like a lot of that powerful actors made some very big mistakes. And I mean, mistakes is even into kind of too kind a word for it. They kind of acted in ways that maximized their profit without much concern for the fallout that could happen, not just to them but also to everyone else in the case of the big risks. And a lot of people were then very angry about this, and I don't think anyone really forgot. And a lot of people feel that, like, basically they got off easy, right? That they weren't punished for what they did before 2007 hard enough. That although almost no one or even no one kind of went to jail in 2009 and 2010. The banks are mostly all still intact and they're still doing really well. And like people, just lots of people feel like the financial industry just hasn't learned their lesson. And they feel like they're just continuing to play all sorts of complicated games and just kind of manipulate and participate in this rigged financial system that's just designed to screw over the little guy, essentially. And what happened with GameStop was basically that, well, at the beginning, you have these Redditors and they started buying up this stock that had a lot of people shorting it. And they just thought that, hey, this company it's a nice little gaming company. It deserves to survive and have a chance. And like, how dare these bankers like basically just try to kill it? And then as the price went up, it just kind of evolved and grew stronger. And it, shot up much higher than I think anyone or almost anyone even expected at the time. And that was like, it just kind of turned into this kind of much more powerful kind of symbolic thing that basically, and it became even more powerful and symbolic once all of this kind of Robin Hood stuff started happening, right? Like when people like stopped being able to trade, when then like basically there were, and especially when some of the kind of media pieces from the Wall Street Journal and all of these kind of financial organizations started coming out, basically blaming the kind of Reddit market manipulators for screwing around with the market. And the public response was like, dude, you've been screwing around with the market since forever. How dare you blame us for doing the thing that you really do as your source of profit every single year. And I don't know that like. And no, I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? Like I definitely don't buy the extreme story that says that short selling is kind of fundamentally illegitimate as a concept, right? Like I think short selling is to financial markets what criticism is to free speech. You can't have a speech ecosystem without criticism. You can't have a financial ecosystem without being able to bet against things. But at the same time, like it is true that there are a lot of these systems that have kind of multiple equilibria, and there's a lot of people, even in the traditional financial space, to get rid of kind of attacking these systems and using big piles of money that ordinary people would never have access to just force a system from one equilibrium to another and to profit as a result. And they've been doing this since forever, and now that a group of kind of random anonymous millennial Redditors is doing it, they're upset, and nobody's buying it. I don't know. I think there's kind of a lot of things that are very beautiful about that. I think it's definitely kind of just interesting because it does kind of just bring back front and center all of these issues about the financial system that we've really people have been talking about to some extent for 12 years, but now it's kind of just all coming back. And as for what will come of this,
how do you think the financial industry will be impacted beyond, some hedge funds lost some money? You talked about you think GameStop will be effective, but do you think any changes will actually happen, regulatory?
I definitely think there's going to be some kind of reforms of just how stock markets work and how trading works. Like even just the whole concept of like delayed settlement, where like when you buy a stock, you don't actually have the stock until 2 days in the future, and for those 2 days, the company basically, or whatever broker you're trading through, provides some amount of capital ahead of time, and they have to have a float that's proportional to some estimate of the volatility or whatever. Like that whole scheme is definitely going to be looked at again. I mean, like it's time to switch to instant settlement, which I thought was fascinating. Like, and I definitely hope that we see some experiments in that direction. I mean, on the other hand, I know that there's kind of the stodgy old defenders of the T+2 approach that talk about the benefits of capital efficiency, and just some of those kind of from having delayed settlement and just allowing whatever kind of conflicting trades happen within that time period to cancel each other out without needing to move any stock at all. But at the same time, like I'm not sure that the millennials value kind of financial efficiency that highly. I wanted to bring up Uniswap, but speaking very abstractly, right? Like the idea is that instead of having an order book exchange, you have this kind of automated thing that just is like a curve, the famous X times Y equals K curve, and you can buy and sell against this curve by kind of moving along the curve, and then whatever amount you move left is the amount of tokens of the type you give up, and then the amount you move up is the amount of tokens of the other type that you get. And it's this fully kind of just automated, incredibly simple construct. And theoretically, there's a lot of these kind of very good reasons for why it should be much less efficient than traditional order book exchanges. And yet it's been much more successful than traditional order book exchanges. So like efficiency in a kind of idealized financial models is definitely not the only thing that brings success. And so I do wonder, like, is there somebody that, to hell with whatever inefficiencies that introduces because T+0 just is right and just. Like, I don't know, we'll see. So I do wonder if, just like in this example of Uniswap, we're just going to see much more examples of people trying out T+0 instant settlement in a lot of different contexts and liking T+0 settlement in a lot of instant context, in a lot of different contexts. And just like to hell with the financial inefficiencies that it brings because it just like makes more intuitive sense. So there's definitely also a kind of broader cultural trend here, I think, which is like, it definitely does feel like a kind of changing of the guard moment, right? Like you see these kind of articles from the mainstream financial media that are kind of, defending short sellers and hedge funds and talking about how terrible this GameStop mob is, and comparing them to the Trump supporters that so joyfully entered your capital a few weeks ago, and it just I don't think these people realize just the extent to which they're just so perfectly fitting into that kind of tired old guard that just doesn't get the way that the world has changed and things work differently now vibe, right? Like, there's it feels like the kind of younger generation just has different ways of looking at financial markets. There was less of this kind of expectation that markets are supposed to work like some kind of really well-oiled, highly efficient machine where everybody is really serious, and there's these, if people follow these rules, then it does like perfect price discovery or anything like that. I think millennials are just more inclined to say, oh, financial markets are a complete joke already, so let's just get in on the joke. And I think that's to a large extent that's inevitable. And there is, of course, the challenging question of, if financial markets are going to be more chaotic, and if things like GameStop and Tesla are going to be more the norm than the exception going forward, then, what does that mean for kind of the world and the economy as a whole?
Any predictions or any thoughts on what or how financial markets might, or should be restructured as a result of this?
I generally am a fan of the approach that just says, well, the markets are just going to be what they are, and it's not clear that there's all that much that you can do about it without risking making things worse. And so the thing that we should focus on is making sure that people's lives are doing well regardless of where the market sits at any particular point in time.
One thing that is affecting the whole world, like UBI and healthcare and other topics you mentioned, but that is currently being decided on by local jurisdictions, is the COVID vaccine. And there's this interesting, or what I find interesting, concept of challenge trials. So the COVID vaccine introduced this idea of challenge trials to most people for the first time. The idea that you waive your liability rights by volunteering to get the vaccine early, and you're waiving your rights in exchange for hoping this vaccine saves your life, hoping this vaccine saves other lives, and hoping to, if you're thinking on behalf of the greater good, that it expedites the testing and data collection and saves the world. What are other areas in modern life that you think we should have challenge trials for?
I think one of the big kind of problems with medical ethics that I personally really dislike is 100 people dying of medical experiments gone wrong is a tragedy, but 1 million people dying because a treatment came a year later than it otherwise would is a statistic. And the way that kind of medical ethics in particular is structured is the whole thing is basically around don't be like the Tuskegee experiments, and don't be like Hitler, and don't be like all of these kind of nasty examples. And just because of scope and sensitivity, which is a universal human fallacy, there's definitely not really this appreciation of kind of need for speed as a humanitarian end in itself. Need for speed is kind of just perceived as a reckless reckless Silicon Valley prejudice, perhaps. But the fact that things innovations happening earlier rather than later just really does improve a lot of people's lives and is just a strong social good is still something that's underappreciated. And COVID feels like it's starting to change that, right? I definitely think that the challenge trials and the vaccines were both approved and started far later than they actually should have been. But after this experience, I definitely think that people are going to be more willing and more inclined to just start things earlier, because COVID really does make clear that waiting has a cost, right? Every month of waiting costs 400 or whatever number of hundreds of thousands of lives. Every month of waiting continues debilitating the economy. Every month of waiting continues destabilizing political systems. And so if we can just solve things technologically with vaccines, then the earlier we do that, basically every month of earliness in the solution is just such a large humanitarian gain. And I'm definitely hoping that spirit can be applied to kind of a lot of other spheres. Going outside of kind of the medical examples, one other thing that would be interesting to just consider is the idea of kind of more experimental jurisdictions. So basically places where, if you go and live to that place, that's considered as explicitly signing a contract that says that you're okay with basically living in a place where a lot of new stuff gets tried and there's certain kinds of higher risks. So one example of this might be drone food delivery, which is something that, if it can be made to work, will just solve so many issues. It would just get rid of traffic jams, or at least significantly alleviate traffic jams. It would significantly alleviate a lot of environmental issues, just reduce costs, make life better for poor people in a lot of ways. Self-driving cars might be another one of those examples. Just 1,000 little things, and just trying to more rapidly kind of iterate and experiment on the urban environment. So, can we have a city where if you move to the city, then, you are basically human challenge trialing self-driving cars and delivery drones? I think that would be really cool.
Well, I cannot wait to live in an experimental jurisdiction in 3021 with you, where Balaji is our president, and we are eating plant-based diets that will be delivered to us by drones. Or I guess we won't be eating by then. Who knows? There will be tubes in us or something like that. What is something that you think is truly widely accepted today that people will either realize is wrong or will be less widely accepted in 2 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, and in 100 years? And I think the different time scales like illuminate different factors. So,
I mean, I guess speaking of believing in God, apparently in 2021, the really cool thing is believing in dog. Like, have you seen the Dogecoin prices? Our relationship to a kind of physical location is definitely going to kind of continue to change. I like our relationship to nationality is going to considerably change as a result of this as well. Like just the concept of if you're not happy in a place, or you feel like your rights are being infringed in a particular place, then why fight it? Just go to a place that satisfies your values better, is one of those things that I think is we're going to start kind of seeing more and more of. This is a scary one. Our relationship to privacy is going to change significantly and kind of very drastically, just because, like, in some spheres, the ability to communicate privately still exists, right? Like, you have all of these encrypted chats and encrypted texts and all of these, but like the level of in-person privacy that we have is lower than it has been in pretty much any point in history, right? Like in a few decades, we're going to be like, forget about, that like China being able to surveil the movements of its own people, or the US being able to surveil the movements of its own people. Like, you'll be able to have China be able to surveil the movements of US people, and the US being able to surveil the movements of Chinese people, just because, resolution from satellites is going to be powerful enough to do that sort of thing. So, what will geopolitics look like in that kind of world is one of those kind of challenging questions that is going to be interesting. Our relationship to just the concept of how we form groups and tribes is definitely going to just change massively, though I'm not exactly sure how. Another fascinating one, I think, is that there's the concept of immutable, right? Like, right, even up to this mindset where there's this thing which is human nature, and human nature is immutable, and then there's kind of layers that you can wrap on top around nature, whether it's education, whether it's tools, whether it's having a phone that you can use to Google stuff, whether it's like ideologies and all of these things. But over the next hundreds of years, or the next 100 years, we are going to figure out how to basically reprogram ourselves to a large degree. And that is just going to break a lot of philosophical concepts. Like, even the philosophical conception of human equality, right, is wanting to be challenged. Just like much more explicitly kind of differentiate between the idea of moral equality in that everyone has a worth, and like that everyone having the ability to have good experiences is something that's inherently valuable for humanity to shoot for, from like claims about kind of like specific kind of physical or kind of mental similarity between different people, and just kind of philosophically navigating that well, and creating a world that's kind of gets the good properties of out of all that, while I don't know, at the same time just preserving this really important idea that we're trying to create a world where everyone can feel empowered and feel good, essentially, still continues. So That will be interesting. One thing that I think that I'm not worried about is one thing that I think will happen, but that I'm not worried about, is the second order social and cultural effects of longevity. Longevity in particular, I think, is one of those things that like, it will cause changes, and it will lead to, the world population just like totally not fitting in with, standard development experts' predictions. And they'll be like, wait, WTF, why are there 17 billion people in the world in 2100? Our charts showed that there should have been like 7 billion. The reality is that the change is just going to happen slowly enough, just in here, because people already age at a maximum of 1 year per year, that we will be able to adapt.
I can't wait for the meme army to take on people age at an average of 1 year per year and see what they do. See what they do with that. You mentioned the P word, privacy, one of my favorite and most troubling topics. And you said that our relationship with privacy is going to change, and that's a scary one. Scary is a very polite way of saying how terrifying it is. And that's why I had to stop watching Black Mirror, because it became too real. And unfortunately, I wish I was more optimistic, but it does seem like the object is in motion and it's going to stay in motion. Do you see any ways to combat that momentum?
One possibility is that more of our life moves into the virtual sphere. And thanks to things like encryption and zero knowledge proofs and all of these cryptographic technologies, the virtual sphere will continue to be fairly free of snooping, or at least have kind of significantly less snooping than the physical world does. So that would be a kind of short and medium term mitigation to not having any privacy at all.
I now have a pretty good idea of what your life in 3021 is going to look like, and it sounds pretty great. And again, I plan on being there with you. Between now and then, the near future, what do you think of like the next 1 to 10 years? And what do you think, or what do you have confidence in that most people would say is crazy?
Okay, so I think in the medium term future, 2020 will be remembered as a nadir, so as a bottom point for probably US and global just like political culture and people's ability to get along with each other at large scales. And basically from here, things are only slowly going to start to improve. I expect that we're going to see just a lot of kind of different positive trends kind of start coming out and getting stronger over the next decade or so. Like one of the trends that I'm personally kind of excited about that a lot of people aren't following well is just this notion of kind of the techno-progressive political conscience. Like just this idea that the large humanitarian gains that can come from basically things like longevity research and drones and just building better cities and space travel and all of these things really can do a lot to kind of like uplift people's lives and make people's lives much better. What other things to be optimistic about? The rise of the thing that economists call like taboo competition, or like however they pronounce the person's name. Just like this idea that if you're not happy with the jurisdiction you're in, you actually can go and move to another one. That's like we've been seeing kind of the rise of that in kind of 2020 and 2021 kind of slowly. So that there's already more and more of these governments that are just issuing kind of digital nomad visas. There's a lot of people just even within individual countries, like Francis, make this be the city of cool tech, and if you want to come here, then you should come here. And just like essentially jurisdictions, this kind of somewhat market-like actor, and they're kind of hopefully just pushing each other to competing with each other too, and making each other better. This is one of those things that I'm definitely, cautiously optimistic about, that good things come out of this. What else? There's like in general, like basically people who are stuck in bad jurisdictions should not be stuck. And this is one of those things that I hope we can find a way to get past. Global poverty reduction, I think kind of mainstream narratives really don't properly appreciate the extent to which places like Africa are just continuing to have quickly growing economies. And like I've been following more and more people from Africa on Twitter, and there's like a very just kind of strong and positive, optimistic feeling among the business community that I really like, and among other kind of culture, generally cultural figures that I really like. It's just there's Africa doesn't really have that much of a recent past. Like it's basically just a lot of colonization and slavery. The present is getting better, but still far from perfect. Another thing, also just small countries. So like small countries are just a category that I think did really well in 2020, right? Like I think maybe in 2019, the way that it seemed was that we were just kind of moving toward more and more domination by this like large powers, and it would basically be the US and China and maybe the EU just sort of having a larger and larger influence on the world to the exception of everyone else. But in 2020, like we were just seeing a lot of small countries did a really good job handling COVID. A lot of small countries are doing a really good job of just having healthy internal political cultures. A lot of small countries are doing a good job of just having better policies. So that's interesting. Like I think a world with more kind of empowered small countries is a world with more choice and more experimentation.
I asked you to explain the future, and I did not specifically ask you to be optimistic or pessimistic, and all your responses were optimistic. So the fact that optimism was your default for what the future looks like gives me hope and puts a smile on my face. So here we are, and I think this is the longest I've ever gone without talking about China. So the time has come. The geopolitical climate is both increasingly and decreasingly affecting and affected by the tech world. And China's playing an increasing role every day, as we've discussed many times. One specific example of where this power and China power struggle and physical and digital technologies is emphasized with Taiwan and the semiconductor industry. Generally curious for your thoughts on how important, from a geopolitical perspective, is it for Taiwan to remain Taiwan? And what happens from a technology perspective, from a privacy perspective, from an economic perspective, if China gets their way with Taiwan?
My general kind of moral view, of course, is that kind of the focus of those kinds of questions should be the welfare of people in Taiwan, and not kind of bigger power games between much larger forces that have whatever kind of security or political interests. Taiwan itself has been doing really well. Like it's I visited it many times. It's got a nice democratic political culture. It's got Audrey Tong. She is very amazing. Nice crypto community as well. I have to say this because unfortunately it is my window to kind of every single part of the world. So, and I think definitely very much wish that that Taiwan does well. But in terms of how that will intersect with all of these kind of geopolitical things, I I don't know. Yeah, this is one of those areas that's just very hard to predict. I I have a feeling that like I had this kind of optimistic feeling that nothing very terrible is going to happen there. Just because I feel like people are like, as the world becomes more interconnected, like there's just going to be too many people that realize any kind of really serious conflict is just a negative sum game for everyone. We'll see. And fingers crossed.
And it seems like there is a growing skepticism or mainstream skepticism of China, or concern that they're going to do X, Y, and Z. What do you think people are underestimating in regards to China, and what do you think people are overestimating in regards to China? Because, I mean, for context, you've spent a lot of time there. I think you speak Mandarin. So I think you have a different perspective on it.
I do think that people in the US overestimate the extent to which they can accomplish what they think their objectives are by going after Chinese tech companies specifically. Basically, I think that if your strategy for the scary things that you're worried about Chinese tech companies doing is specifically to go after Chinese, then first of all, you're going to be very vulnerable to just any non-Chinese tech company or anyone from any other part of the world doing trying to do exactly the same thing. And basically you've essentially, I think my philosophy for cyberspace specifically is that we need less going after lions and more armoring the sheep. Just because the problem with going after lions is that when you go after lions, it's hard to credibly convince the world that you're the one going after the lions and you're not the one being the lion. And the problem is that the sort of entity and culture you need to become in order to properly attack Chinese tech companies and many other disadvantages. So could also be just kind of the libertarian in me speaking, where I just keep wanting to think that the important thing is not America versus China. The important thing is tech companies versus statism everywhere, essentially. It's definitely true that a lot of the conflict, even if it's negative sum for humanity overall, is good for crypto. It's interesting how conflicts it can often end up being actually being good for the third party, right? I remember when I was still in high school, there was this interesting puzzle about three people in a duel, where it's basically three people in the shooting duel that have different levels of accuracy. A is more accurate than B is, and B is more accurate than C. And the question is, who's the most likely to win the duel? And under a lot of choices for rules and parameters, the answer is C. And in fact, the answer is C to such an extent that if the rule says that C shoots first, then C's optimal first shot is to shoot in the air to make sure he does not hit A or B the first time. And the reason why this is true is because A and B both know that A and B are each other's greatest threat. And so they're just going to basically kill each other. And so C is the most likely to emerge as the winner. And we can see most of mechanics like this a lot of the time, right? So one fun political example is that as of 2021, Vietnam has won 2 wars with the United States. The first war is the one in the 1960s and the 70s. And the second example is that Vietnam is the winner of the trade war between the US and China. And crypto is definitely one of those things that's well positioned to be this C that's the winner of great conflicts between whether it's one state versus another state or states versus corporations.
That actually, what you're saying kind of triggers me to think of something I've been thinking about, which is January 2021, I think, has been an unintentional ad for decentralization, which is something we've talked about. I know I'm going to use the C word, but in that, the first half of the month was an ad for decentralized communication apps, with Trump getting kicked off everywhere, Signal and Telegram seeing record numbers, WhatsApp changing their privacy settings. And the second half of the month could not have been a better advertisement for decentralized finance. You're like, wow. But it was also a head fake in that you see AOC, you see Ted Cruz all agreeing and getting riled up, and you're just like, wow, everyone's going to be so focused on the wrong thing right now. Like everyone's going to be focused on the lion of Robinhood, the financial systems, hedge funds, and DeFi is the sheep here.
January 2021 was definitely a kind of very interesting kind of curveball bouncing back and forth month, like especially in terms of just like the narrative around censorship, right? Like in the wake of the social media responses to the lovely Viking LARP that you guys had over in DC. Like basically a lot of people were booted off of social media, and there was this kind of big uproar around hate speech and all of these things. And like it was definitely in a lot of ways like the most pro censorship moment kind of in culture for at least like the last couple of decades. And in a lot of ways that really worried me, right? Like. And you even saw, the response from outside. The response from outside the U.S. was very worried. But like you saw, Alexei Navalny, the Russian kind of opposition politician, basically, said, like, hey guys, you're making a bad precedent here. And even people from Europe were concerned. People in like places in Europe do have kind of government imposed restrictions on free speech, like Germany has, the anti-Nazi laws and all that, but they're very concerned about this idea of like basically a private corporation kind of enforcing speech restrictions for, and ultimately bigger than the country, just the world in some sense. But at the same time, like, within the US, there was definitely this kind of dominant mood. I thought that, these things are necessary, and like actually the free speech thing is kind of overrated. And then 2 weeks later the Wall Street Bets Discord server got like taken down for hate speech, and it's like, wait a minute, this stuff can actually get abused. So that was an interesting kind of one punch, 2-punch curveball that everyone got. And in terms of what I think will happen, I think kind of the cat is definitely out of the bag in terms of centralized entities being pressured to censor people and just generally kind of kick people off of their platforms if they're doing things that they don't like. So I see the trend going forward as like just being both the centralized services kind of needing to or being pressured to kind of go after people, and people trying to create some alternatives to centralized services on the other hand. And there just being a complicated interplay between these two things. And that's going to be one of the big dynamics of the next couple of decades. So we'll see.
Vitalik, you make me laugh. You make me smile. You expand my brain. Thank you. This has been so fun.
Thank you, Morgan. This has been fun.
You've been listening to the NFX podcast. You can rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, and you can subscribe to the NFX podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. For more information on building iconic technology companies, visit nfx.com.